from KUNC and the NPR network. This is In the NOCO. I'm Stephanie Daniel, in for Erin O'Toole. It was a hot and smoke-filled week last week, with 4 major wildfires burning along the Front Range. One person reportedly died in the Stone Canyon fire. Hundreds of people were evacuated from their homes, and dozens of structures were lost in the 4 fires. While fire is a normal part of the ecosystem of the Mountain West, fires that push into urban areas are destructive to those landscapes. The effects of urban fires, also known as urban conflagrations, can have long-term effects on our waterways' local ecology. Joining me today is Dr. Lauren Mayatsi, PhD candidate in the University of Colorado Boulder's Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research and Civil and Environmental Engineering. She joins me to discuss what we should be looking for in the water after a major fire. Hi, Lauren. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Lauren, you were at CU Boulder focusing on metals in streams before you switched to studying the after effects of fires. What got you interested in pursuing this research?
Yeah, rather than, an interest, it was more that there was a need in our department. There was a study looking at metals after the Camp Fire and watersheds that were impacted, and they really needed someone who, had an analytical chemistry background. So I started as an analytical chemist and moved to become an environmental engineer so that I could work on problems that were of emerging concern and contaminants of emerging concern.
And I know you also did some research into the after effects of the Marshall Fire. Can you talk a little bit more about what you studied?
Yeah, absolutely. So, after the 2018 Camp Fire, there were still a lot of questions about how these urban conflagrations impact our water systems. And so when the Marshall Fire happened, I worked with a team at CU Boulder with 3 faculty members and 2 other graduate students. And we looked at both the metals and the nutrients. So we looked at the water chemistry. We also looked at ecosystem impacts. So we looked at these organisms called benthic macroinvertebrates. If you're a fly fisherman, you might recognize these organisms as the ones that you tie your flies to imitate. So we looked at these organisms to see how healthy the ecosystem was after the fire.
Let's turn to the current work that you're doing. You look at 2 different metrics to assess water health. One is the chemistry of water, and the other is the small animals that live on the bottom of waterways called benthic invertebrates. And you mentioned those already. Those are things like clams, worms, and crustaceans. What information do each of these give you about short and long-term effects of wildfire?
So the chemistry, we go out after a storm and we look at the chemistry of the water, and this gives us a snapshot of what is exactly going on in that moment in the stream. But when we look at the organisms in the community of those benthic invertebrates, what we're seeing is a longer term profile of the impacts of that water chemistry. Since those organisms, they live on the benthos, that's the bottom of the stream, they're constantly exposed to that changing water chemistry. This gives us a more holistic picture of the ecosystem health of the stream.
And can you just talk a little bit about what that tells you? What are the effects to these invertebrates that you can look for that can apply to our waterways and can apply to humans?
So to assess ecosystem health with these benthic invertebrates, we use a couple different methods. One of them is we look at what functional feeding group they're a part of. So each organism sort of has its own job in the stream. Some of them are predators. They eat living or dead biomass. Some of them are scrapers, which means that they eat the algae at the bottom of the stream. And what we saw was even though the algae was still growing a lot in the burned urban areas, we weren't getting the same number of those scrapers organisms. These are mayflies, tiny mayflies that need healthy algae to be able to sustain themselves. And so what's interesting is, since we didn't see as many of those mayflies, we suspect that algae in the layer on the bottom of the stream may be uptaking metals and actually becoming harmful. And this is important because those organisms responsible for eating that algae help control the algae and keep it from overgrowing.
So the wildfires that are burning now are primarily in forested areas. Should people be concerned about what is going into the waterways with these fires?
So fires in our fire adapted systems, fires can be natural and can be really good actually for waterways and for these ecosystems. But still, when we get these areas of burned vegetation along stream banks, this destabilizes our stream banks and can cause, huge inputs of sediment into our streams. It can also cause flooding and debris flow. This is like a large mudslide, which can include stones and boulders. And at the same time, as we're burning that vegetation, we're releasing nutrients such as phosphorus, nitrogen, and carbon into our streams. And this can be positive. This can increase the biodiversity of the stream and actually, create what we consider healthy disturbance. At the same time, though, we're looking out, for flooding and other impacts that could be more dangerous.
Are we likely to see a rise in metals and pollutants in water streams from the structures that have burned in the last week of fires?
This is a good question. One difference between having just a handful of structures burning up in the mountains versus true urban conflagration, like what we saw during the Marshall Fire, is that when we're not in that really urbanized built environment, there aren't as many of those man-made surfaces like concrete, storm water management systems. And so, those systems like we had with the Marshall Fire allowed for contaminants to be funneled directly into the creek very efficiently. This is sort of the 1-2 punch of the urban conflagration. You have the fuels, our homes, structures, people's vehicles. So you get these sort of more complex contaminants, and then you have those hydrologically efficient surfaces that funnel the contaminants right into the creek. When we have just a handful of homes up in the mountains, this is something we're still sort of learning about, but it's not quite as much of a concern on this scale.
Lauren, you've been talking about the negative effects of wildfire, and I know you mentioned a couple of positives earlier, but I want to talk a bit more about those. What are the positive effects of wildfires, and what will we likely be seeing in the forested burn areas and the waterways coming out of those areas in the next year or two?
One thing that's kind of amazing about fire is it provides this rejuvenation cycle. So when we burn up old vegetation, dead trees, beetle-killed pine, we're releasing nutrients, and this allows for new plants to come in and can increase biodiversity. That's just the different types of plants that we have in an area. And it does the same thing in streams. It can put nutrients into the stream and allow different organisms to thrive. And another benefit of these fires is that as we burn up these dense, dry fuels, we're actually creating more security against higher intensity blazes in the future. As fires sort of get more intense, they can light what's called ladder fuels. And these are dry fuels that allow the crown of the canopy to burn. Allowing more frequent burning allows for healthier fires, more good fire, and the prevention of those higher severity blazes that could cause urban conflagrations.
Lauren, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Lauren Mayazzi is a PhD candidate at the University of Colorado Boulder. She also mentioned that people in evacuation areas using well water should have their water tested before drinking. And she says, please stay safe when going home. If you were evacuated from recent fires, we'd love to hear from you. Email us or send us a voice memo at noco@kunc.org and let us know how you're doing. That's all for In the NOCO today. I'm Stephanie Daniel. Erin O'Toole will be back tomorrow. Have a great day.